There is a painful question that countless people ask themselves after loving someone who seems emotionally unavailable. Why do they keep pulling away? Why do they seem so interested one moment and so distant the next? If I become more understanding, more patient, more perfect, will they finally stay? These questions can consume your mind because you naturally assume the answer must be about you. You begin searching for flaws within yourself. Maybe I asked for too much. Maybe I loved too deeply. Maybe I expected too much closeness. Maybe I should have been less emotional. Little by little, you start believing that if you could only become the version of yourself they seem to want, everything would finally work. But here is the truth that changes everything. In many emotionally avoidant dynamics, the fantasy is often not about finding the perfect person. It is about avoiding the discomfort that real intimacy inevitably brings. Real relationships ask something of us. They ask us to be honest. They ask us to be vulnerable. They ask us to communicate when it feels uncomfortable. They ask us to admit mistakes. They ask us to let another person truly know us. For someone who fears emotional vulnerability, those moments can feel overwhelming. It is often easier to imagine love than to fully live it. Fantasy asks for nothing. Reality asks for growth. Fantasy allows someone to imagine the perfect relationship where conflict never exists. Reality reminds us that every healthy relationship includes misunderstandings, difficult conversations, and moments of emotional discomfort. Fantasy says, the right person will never challenge me. Reality says, the right relationship will help both people grow. That difference is enormous. Sometimes an avoidant person may seem incredibly affectionate during the early stages of a relationship. Everything feels exciting. The conversations are effortless. The connection feels magical. But as emotional intimacy deepens, something changes. Now expectations appear. Now vulnerability becomes necessary. Now the relationship requires consistency instead of excitement alone. This is often where emotional distance begins. Not necessarily because the other person has done something wrong, but because true intimacy feels frightening to someone who has learned to protect themselves through emotional distance. Unfortunately, many people respond by trying even harder. They become more available, more accommodating, more forgiving, more understanding. They tell themselves, if I stop asking for reassurance, if I never bring up difficult conversations, if I become easier to love, they'll finally stop pulling away. Without realizing it, they begin shaping themselves around another person's emotional comfort. At first, these changes seem small. You stop mentioning things that hurt your feelings. You pretend you are okay when you are not. You hide your loneliness because you do not want to seem too needy. You convince yourself that silence is maturity, but silence is not always peace. Sometimes silence is simply self-abandonment wearing the mask of patience. Ask yourself this: what kind of relationship requires you to hide your authentic emotions just to keep it alive? Healthy love does not ask you to disappear. Healthy love does not reward emotional invisibility. Healthy love makes room for two people to exist honestly. Think about a beautiful tree. A tree does not become stronger by cutting off its own branches. It becomes stronger by growing deeper roots. Your emotional needs are not weaknesses that must be trimmed away. They are part of who you are. The right relationship will not require you to amputate parts of your personality just to be accepted. One of the greatest mistakes people make is confusing adaptation with connection. There is nothing wrong with compromise. Every healthy relationship requires flexibility. But compromise is different from erasing yourself. Compromise says, let's find a solution together. Self-abandonment says, I'll stop being myself so you'll stay. Those are completely different paths. When you constantly prioritize another person's emotional comfort over your own emotional truth, something slowly begins to disappear. You stop recognizing yourself. You hesitate before expressing your opinions. You become anxious before sending a simple message. You replay conversations in your mind, wondering if you said too much. You celebrate receiving the smallest amount of affection because it feels rare. That is not emotional security. That is emotional survival. And you deserve more than survival. You deserve a relationship where closeness is not something you have to earn by shrinking yourself. Many people fear that if they stop adapting, they will lose the relationship. But consider another possibility. What if the relationship only survives because you keep abandoning yourself? Is that truly love, or is it simply a pattern built on fear? There comes a moment when you must stop asking, "How do I become the person they won't leave?" and begin asking, "Why do I believe I must stop being myself to deserve love?" That question opens the door to healing, because the strongest version of you understands something that fear can never teach. You cannot build lasting love by pretending to have no emotional needs. You cannot create genuine intimacy by hiding your heart. You cannot experience healthy connection while constantly protecting another person's comfort at the expense of your own. Real love is not the absence of discomfort. Real love is two people choosing honesty even when honesty feels difficult. Real love is not perfection, it is presence, it is consistency, it is respect. It is emotional responsibility. Most importantly, it is mutual. If only one person is carrying the emotional weight of the relationship, that is not partnership. That is exhaustion. So let today be the day you stop chasing someone else's fantasy, stop trying to become quieter just because your voice makes someone uncomfortable. Stop trying to become emotionally smaller just because your heart is capable of loving deeply. Stop believing that your needs are obstacles to love. Your needs are not the problem. Your feelings are not the problem. Your desire for emotional closeness is not the problem. The problem begins when you believe you must betray yourself to be accepted. Never forget this. The strongest relationships are not built by one person becoming less. They are built when two people are willing to become more honest, more courageous, more accountable, and more emotionally available. And the greatest act of courage is not convincing someone to stay. It is refusing to lose yourself while trying to keep them. Because the moment you choose authenticity over approval, you reclaim something far more valuable than any relationship. You reclaim yourself. One of the most heartbreaking things that can happen in a relationship is not being rejected. It is slowly disappearing while trying to prevent rejection. This rarely happens all at once. It happens so gradually that you hardly notice it. One compromise, one excuse, one silent sacrifice, one ignored feeling, one more promise to yourself that says, "It's okay, I'll bring it up another time." But that another time never comes. Instead, you become an expert at managing someone else's comfort while quietly abandoning your own. When someone is emotionally avoidant, you may begin believing that the solution is to ask for less. You tell yourself, "Maybe I'm too emotional. Maybe I need to be more independent. Maybe if I stop expecting reassurance, they'll finally feel safe enough to stay." Without realizing it, you begin negotiating against yourself. You lower your expectations, you silence your needs. You convince yourself that wanting consistency is unreasonable. You apologize for asking for simple communication. You celebrate crumbs because you have forgotten what a full meal looks like. And this is where many people become trapped. Not because they are weak, but because hope is powerful. Hope whispers, if I just try a little harder, if I become a little easier, if I love them a little better, everything will finally change. Hope itself is not the enemy. Hope helps people survive difficult seasons. But hope without reality can become a prison, because while you are waiting for another person to become emotionally available, your own life quietly begins to revolve around uncertainty. Your mood depends on whether they reply. Your confidence depends on whether they seem affectionate. Your peace depends on whether they are emotionally present today. Without intending to, you hand someone else the keys to your emotional well-being. That is an incredibly heavy burden to place on another human being, and an even heavier burden to carry yourself. Healthy love should add to your life. It should not become the only source of your emotional stability. Think about a beautiful piece of music. Every instrument has its own unique sound. The piano does not try to become the violin. The violin does not silence itself so the drums can be heard. Each instrument contributes its authentic voice, and together they create harmony. Relationships work the same way. Harmony does not happen because one person disappears. Harmony happens because both people are allowed to exist fully. But when you begin chasing another person's fantasy of the perfect partner, something dangerous happens. You stop asking, "What do I need?" and you begin asking, "What do they need me to become?" That question slowly steals your identity. You become afraid to express disappointment. You hesitate before asking for affection. You overanalyze every conversation. You begin measuring your words instead of speaking your truth. Eventually, you start believing that your value depends on how little space you take up emotionally. That belief is heartbreaking because it is completely false. Your emotions are not inconveniences. Your need for connection is not weakness. Your desire to feel seen, heard, and valued is part of being human. There is nothing unhealthy about wanting emotional safety. The danger begins when you convince yourself that your emotional needs must disappear in order for someone else to stay. Many people confuse emotional independence with emotional suppression. They believe strength means never needing reassurance, never feeling hurt, never expressing disappointment, never asking for support. But that is not strength. That is isolation. True emotional strength looks very different. It says, I can stand on my own, but I also value healthy connection. I respect your independence, and I also respect my own emotional needs. I will not force closeness, but I will not pretend I need nothing just to avoid losing you. That is confidence. Confidence is not pretending you are unaffected. Confidence is trusting that your needs deserve respect. There comes a powerful moment in healing when you stop asking, how can I become easier to love? And begin asking, why do I believe I must earn basic respect? That question changes everything because love is not supposed to be a performance. You were never meant to audition for a permanent place in someone's life. You were never meant to prove your worth through endless patience. You were never meant to shrink your personality so someone else would feel comfortable. The healthiest relationships are built between two complete people. Not one person carrying all the emotional labor while the other remains emotionally unavailable. Imagine carrying a heavy backpack every single day. At first you think, I can handle this. But week after week, month after month, your shoulders begin to ache. You become exhausted, not because you are weak, but because you were never meant to carry the entire weight alone. That is what emotional imbalance feels like. You become responsible for maintaining the connection. You initiate every difficult conversation. You repair every misunderstanding. You calm every conflict. You reassure them while receiving little reassurance in return. Eventually, you realize something important. Love should not constantly feel like emotional labor performed by one person. Healthy love requires participation from both hearts. This realization is often frightening because it forces you to face a difficult truth. Some relationships survive only because one person keeps sacrificing themselves. The moment that person begins honoring their own needs, the relationship struggles. If a relationship can exist only when one person remains silent, that relationship was never built on equality. It was built on imbalance. Never mistake silence for peace. Never mistake emotional distance for maturity. Never mistake self-erasure for love. Real love welcomes honesty. Real love creates space for vulnerability. Real love allows both people to have needs without shame. The strongest version of you is not the one who learns how to ask for less. The strongest version of you is the one who finally believes they deserve more. More respect, more consistency, more honesty, more emotional safety, more mutual effort. Because you are not difficult to love. You are simply asking for what healthy relationships naturally provide. And if someone can only keep you by convincing you to become less than who you truly are, they are not protecting the relationship. They are protecting their comfort. Choose something greater than comfort. Choose authenticity. Choose self-respect. Choose the courage to speak your truth, even when your voice trembles. Because the day you stop chasing another person's fantasy is the day you finally begin living your own life. And there is no greater freedom than waking up each morning, knowing that you no longer need to become someone else just to deserve love. You are already enough, not because someone else finally recognized your worth, but because you finally did. There is a question that quietly lives in the hearts of so many people. How do I make them stay? It sounds like a question about love, but beneath it is often something much deeper. How do I avoid being abandoned? How do I become unforgettable? How do I keep someone from walking away? Many people spend years searching for the perfect answer. They read books. They watch videos. They change their personality. They become more patient, more forgiving, more understanding. They tell themselves, if I become everything they need, they'll never leave me. But life teaches a different lesson. You can become everything for the wrong person and still not be enough. And you can simply be yourself with the right person and finally feel at peace. That is because healthy relationships are not built on fear of losing each other. They are built on the freedom to be authentic. One of the greatest tragedies in relationships is that people often become experts at keeping others while forgetting how to keep themselves. They stay in conversations that destroy their confidence. They remain in relationships that constantly make them question their worth. They accept disrespect because they fear loneliness more than emotional pain. Slowly, almost invisibly, they begin abandoning themselves. They stop speaking honestly. They stop trusting their instincts. They stop honoring their boundaries. They stop believing that their needs matter. And eventually, they wake up one day wondering, where did I go? That question is heartbreaking because the answer is often the same. You disappeared while trying to make someone else stay. Never forget this truth. The greatest loss is not when someone walks out of your life. The greatest loss is when you walk away from your own identity in order to keep them. Many people believe strength means holding on. Sometimes it does. But sometimes strength means letting go of the version of yourself that believes love must be earned through suffering. Think about a house. If the foundation is cracked, painting the walls will not solve the problem. You can decorate it beautifully. You can hide the damage, but eventually the structure begins to collapse. Self-worth is the foundation of every healthy relationship. Without it, every disagreement feels like rejection. Every silence feels like abandonment. Every misunderstanding feels like proof that you are not enough. But when your foundation is built on self-respect instead of external validation, everything changes. You still care deeply. You still love sincerely. But you no longer lose yourself every time someone pulls away. You understand something that emotionally healthy people learn with time. Your value does not increase because someone chooses you. And it does not decrease because someone leaves. Your worth has never been dependent on another person's ability to recognize it. It has always existed. The challenge is learning to believe it. There comes a powerful moment in healing when your questions begin to change. Instead of asking, how do I make them stay? You ask, do I feel emotionally safe in this relationship? Instead of asking, what else can I give? You ask, is this relationship giving both of us the opportunity to grow? Instead of asking, why aren't I enough? You ask, why have I accepted less than I deserve? Those questions shift your attention away from chasing approval and toward protecting your peace. That is emotional maturity. One of the greatest signs of growth is realizing that love without emotional safety is not enough. Attraction is not enough. Chemistry is not enough. History is not enough. Potential is not enough. Without trust, without respect, without consistency, without emotional accountability, a relationship becomes exhausting instead of nourishing. Many people remain because they remember who someone was in the beginning. They keep hoping that version will return. They hold on to memories instead of reality. But healing teaches you to stop falling in love with potential and start paying attention to patterns. Promises matter, but patterns tell the truth. Words can inspire hope. Actors reveal character. The strongest people are not those who never experience heartbreak. The strongest people are those who refuse to let heartbreak convince them they are unworthy of love. That is resilience. It is choosing hope without abandoning wisdom. It is choosing compassion without sacrificing boundaries. It is choosing forgiveness without surrendering your self-respect. Imagine climbing a mountain. The higher you climb, the more clearly you see the path below. From the bottom, every obstacle looks enormous. From the top, you realize how far you have already come. Healing gives you that higher perspective. You begin seeing relationships differently. You stop confusing emotional intensity with emotional intimacy. You stop chasing inconsistency because it feels exciting. You stop believing that uncertainty is romance. Instead, you begin appreciating something you once overlooked: peace. A healthy relationship should not constantly leave you anxious. It should not force you to decode mixed signals. It should not make you question your value every week. Healthy love feels emotionally safe. It feels honest. It feels dependable. It allows both people to grow without fear. Most importantly, healing teaches you that you are responsible for one relationship above all others, the relationship you have with yourself. that relationship determines every other relationship in your life. If you constantly abandon yourself, you will struggle to recognize when others do the same. But when you honor your own boundaries, when you trust your instincts, when you respect your own emotional needs, you naturally begin attracting healthier connections. Not because you become perfect, but because you stop accepting relationships that require you to become less than who you are. And here is one of the most liberating truths you will ever learn. You cannot control whether someone stays. You cannot force emotional availability. You cannot heal wounds that another person refuses to acknowledge. You cannot love someone enough to make them choose growth. That is their responsibility. Your responsibility is different. Your responsibility is to wake up every day and choose yourself, choose honesty over pretending, choose peace over chaos, choose boundaries over guilt, choose dignity over desperation, choose growth over fear. There may still be people who leave your life. That is part of being human. Not every relationship is meant to last forever. But when you refuse to abandon yourself, something extraordinary happens. Even if someone walks away, you remain whole. Even if someone rejects you, you remain valuable. Even if someone misunderstands you, you remain authentic. Because your identity is no longer built upon another person's acceptance. It is built upon your own character. That is real freedom. That is emotional strength. And that is the lesson every person deserves to remember. The goal of life is not to become so perfect that no one ever leaves you. The goal is to become so grounded in your own worth that even if someone does leave, they do not take your peace, your dignity, or your identity with them, because the person who truly never leaves you is the person you see in the mirror every morning. Protect that relationship.